A young nurse named Leela stepped off the bus in the gray light of dawn, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as she made her way through the nearly empty hospital lobby. Her shift began in 20 minutes, yet there was already a familiar flutter in her heart, a mixture of anticipation and nerves. She was used to the daily rhythm of caring for patients, but this particular morning felt different. She couldn't put her finger on why, only that a quiet buzz coursed through her veins. Leela thought maybe it was the strong coffee she drank too quickly, or maybe it was something else entirely. She clocked in and slipped on her uniform, smoothing down the neat white fabric. It was a mundane ritual, tying her hair back, checking her ID badge, but she took pride in being thorough. She had come a long way to get here, studying night and day to earn her nursing degree, determined to help others while providing for her widowed mother back in their hometown. Working in a renowned hospital in the city wasn't exactly glamorous, her salary only stretched so far. Still, it was a good job, a step up from her modest origins, and she felt she was on the right path. Her first assignment that morning was to assist an older nurse with the basic care of a special patient who had been in a coma for weeks. The man, known officially as Mr. Ethan Wells, had arrived after a serious car accident. He was young, around 32, she guessed, and had no family listed on his chart. He came in unconscious, accompanied by vague instructions from a lawyer. That alone had been strange. A well-dressed man in a suit dropping off a sealed envelope for the attending physician, explaining that all hospital costs would be covered privately. Then the man vanished before anyone could ask more questions. There was speculation among the staff. Some nurses believed Ethan must be from a wealthy family, but no visitors ever came. Others assumed he might be an orphan or estranged from relatives. The staff's confusion only deepened when the bills were always promptly paid, no matter how large. One rumor had it that he was a traveling entrepreneur who'd hidden his fortune. Another claimed he was just the front for someone else's plan. None of it was official. The sealed envelope remained locked in a file cabinet. Only the attending doctor, Dr. Hamilton, seemed privy to its contents. Leela entered Ethan's room with a gentle knock on the door, even though she knew he couldn't hear. The blinds were partially drawn, letting in a narrow band of morning sun. He lay there silent, connected to machines that beeped softly in the background. His hair was neatly trimmed, and he somehow looked peaceful in a hospital bed. She watched him for a moment, feeling a twinge of compassion. All comatose patients carried a certain sadness, but with Ethan, it struck her as especially heartbreaking. There was something about a life paused in its prime. So many dreams, plans, and joys put on hold. She set about her duties, checking his vitals, ensuring his IV drip was correct, and then preparing to bathe him. It was an intimate task, and she treated it with professionalism. If he were awake, she often wondered, what would he think of all this? Would he be embarrassed or grateful? She tried not to dwell on those thoughts too much, but they persisted as she gently sponged his arms and chest, feeling the warmth of his skin. She told herself it was just routine patient care, but for some reason her heart fluttered. She kept thinking, he's so young. Nurse Miriam, the senior on duty, stepped in to oversee. Leela had her gloves on, carefully moving the washcloth over Ethan's shoulder. She murmured updates to Nurse Miriam, who only nodded. Then, without warning, a low moan came from Ethan's lips. It made Leela jump. His eyes flickered, though he didn't fully open them. A hush fell over the room. Miriam whispered that such reflexes occasionally happened, but Leela's pulse quickened. She watched Ethan's face, but after a few seconds the flicker subsided, and he seemed to slip back into that same deep sleep. The moment passed, but it lingered in her mind. Perhaps he was on the brink of waking. She had heard stories of comatose patients slowly regaining consciousness after weeks. She offered a small prayer that day would come soon. In the corridor, she updated Dr. Hamilton, who only nodded with a polite smile. He seemed neither alarmed nor surprised. They would keep an eye on any signs of improvement. Days went by in their routine. Leela's responsibilities piled up. New patients admitted, old ones discharged, the occasional frantic emergency. Still, she found herself drawn to Ethan's room whenever she had a spare moment. She'd stand by his bedside, adjusting his blankets or humming softly while checking his monitors. It wasn't just her job, something about him compelled her. And despite never speaking a single word to him, he was, after all, comatose. She felt a curious bond forming. She would tell him about her day, in whispers, though she knew he couldn't respond. Rumors continued to swirl among the staff. The head nurse mentioned hearing a phone call in some foreign language from an unknown caretaker. Another nurse said the brand of pajamas delivered for Ethan was from a luxurious label that cost more than a month's salary. Leela simply nodded at the speculation but didn't dwell on it. To her, he was just a patient in need of care. Whatever his wealth or background, he deserved kindness and dignity. Late one afternoon, Leela was tidying up Ethan's room after a routine check of his vitals. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across his still form. She paused, feeling a strange tug in her chest. He looked like someone who had the entire world to explore, someone who shouldn't be trapped in this bed. His eyes remained closed, his body unmoving except for the gentle rise and fall of his chest. The smell of antiseptic lingered in the air and the monitors hummed softly. She found herself quietly saying, "I hope you wake up soon, there's so much to see out there." It was a silly confession, but it gave her solace, as if sharing her own hope might help him heal. She finished cleaning and turned to switch off the lights, unaware that beyond these walls, an entire hidden life was waiting to converge on their quiet, shared existence. As weeks turned into a month, Leela's financial burdens also began to weigh more heavily on her mind. The hospital's salary was stable, but her mother's medical bills back home were increasing. She'd been trying to send money to help out, cutting costs wherever she could. She sometimes found herself looking at Ethan, imagining that if only she had enough resources, she could ensure no one she loved ever suffered the way her family had. But she chided herself for that daydream. She was proud of her honest work, determined to stand on her own 2 feet. One evening while she was doing her rounds, Leela noticed a shadow at the end of the hallway. A tall man in an impeccable suit stood outside Ethan's room. She tried to approach, but by the time she got there, he'd disappeared. Puzzled, she peeked in. Ethan was, as always, motionless. She sensed a presence in the room, as if someone had just been there. Nothing seemed amiss, though. She wondered if that suited stranger could be Ethan's mysterious guardian, the one who settled the bills. It added another layer of intrigue. She resolved to report it to Dr. Hamilton, but the doctor only frowned, said he'd look into it, and then changed the subject. That night, restless thoughts kept Leela awake. She thought of the strange visitor. She thought of Ethan's fleeting moan. She thought of how comfortable she'd become in his presence. It was as though he'd quietly become an anchor in her daily life. In her more whimsical moods, she imagined him waking up, smiling and striking up a conversation, or thanking her for looking after him. She pictured them walking through the hospital garden, sharing laughter, or even forging a friendship outside these sterile walls. She tried to banish those thoughts, reminding herself this was about professional care, but her heart resisted. Something about him stirred her deeper feelings. A few more days passed. By then, people had grown used to the idea that Ethan might remain in a coma indefinitely. Even Leela sometimes wondered if her initial hope was naive. But she continued to do her best, turning him to prevent bed sores, speaking softly to him as though he could hear every word, bathing him with gentle, respectful care. Then one morning, she entered the room carrying fresh towels. She paused. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw his eyelids twitch a distinct flicker. She hurried over, placing the towels on a nearby chair, leaning forward to study his face. He gave a soft groan, long fingers curling just slightly. The monitors began to beep more erratically. Leela's heart soared. She ran to call for Dr. Hamilton. A swirl of staff rushed in, adjusting machines, shining a light into Ethan's eyes, speaking in urgent tones. After a few tense moments, Ethan's eyes fluttered open. He blinked, disoriented. The staff broke into exclamations. A wave of relief coursed through Leela as she stood at the back of the small crowd, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. She whispered, "You did it," though she was sure he couldn't hear her in all the commotion. It was a miracle. People in comas for that long sometimes never regained consciousness, and yet here he was, awake and blinking. The next several hours were a blur of medical tests. Dr. Hamilton ordered scans, observed neurological responses, and scribbled notes. Ethan's voice was hoarse, and he struggled to speak more than a few words at first. He seemed aware but disoriented, wincing at the bright lights. Leela felt a surge of protectiveness. She wanted to be the one who reassured him, but she was busy handing instruments to Dr. Hamilton, hooking up new IV drips, and pushing a cart loaded with supplies. In the flurry, Ethan's gaze landed on her. It lasted only a second, a heavy, uncertain look. But in that fleeting moment, Leela felt her cheeks warm. She offered a tentative smile, which he attempted to return, though the corner of his mouth trembled. He looked grateful, but also overwhelmed. When the crowd dispersed, Dr. Hamilton approached Leela privately, praising her attentive care. He hinted that her watchful nursing might have played a part in Ethan's stable condition. That night, she went home with her heart thrumming like a hummingbird's wings. Over the next few days, Ethan's stamina grew in small increments. He learned to sit up, though dizziness often overcame him. He spoke in short sentences, each word sounding foreign on his tongue. Leela noticed how carefully he chose his words, as if weighing each one. Even so, he never revealed much about who he was or how he ended up at the hospital. He admitted to having only scattered memories. When pressed, he'd mutter something about a car accident, but details were hazy. Each morning, Leela would come in to help him wash up and change into a fresh gown. Now he was awake, the routine felt different, charged with a new kind of awareness. He'd watch her in that quiet, thoughtful way, occasionally apologizing for the trouble. She'd reassure him, sliding the curtain for privacy, her hands gentle as always. And in those small, intimate moments, she'd sense his vulnerability. She, grown used to caring for him while he slept, but now he was present. Part of her felt shy, almost bashful. Another part felt protective, grateful that he'd found his way back. She realized she was getting too involved. Professional boundaries, she told herself, and yet she couldn't help wanting to know more about him. Sometimes he offered small pieces, that he'd traveled a lot for work, that he used to enjoy reading on long flights, that he craved a good cup of coffee. But if anyone asked about his finances or family, he deflected the question. There was an undefinable sadness in his eyes whenever those topics arose. One afternoon, while adjusting the pillow behind Ethan's head, Leela let slip her own background. She told him about her mother's health struggles, about the burdens of medical bills, about how she took the job in this big hospital hoping to climb the ranks and eventually earn enough to secure her family's future. She regretted rambling so much and apologized, but he looked at her with genuine empathy, urging her to keep talking. She caught herself thinking, he's so gentle. And the idea that he was perhaps just a normal man who'd had a stroke of horrible luck overshadowed the rumors of unimaginable wealth that once floated around the nurse's station. At the end of that shift, as Leela was leaving his room, he quietly thanked her in a voice that wobbled with unspoken emotion. "I don't know how long I was out," he said, "but you were there for me, weren't you?" She froze, her hand on the doorknob. "I did what any nurse would do," she replied, trying to hide the tremor in her tone. He gave a small smile and said, "Maybe, but not every nurse would have gone so far." She left the room with her heart thumping. Outside in the hallway, she realized how emotionally invested she'd become in his recovery. The next day, as they went through his therapy schedule, she noticed something peculiar. A tall, stern man in a dark suit stood near the nurse's station. When Leela went to find a pen, the man caught her eye, then quietly retreated down another corridor. It was the same man she'd glimpsed before, months ago. This time, he was definitely checking on Ethan's progress from a distance, but he never entered the room. He vanished whenever staff approached. Leela tried asking a few colleagues, but nobody recognized him. Midway through her shift, Leela found herself in the supply room rummaging for bandages. Her mind drifted back to Ethan, how his eyes lit with curiosity, how he seemed so lost yet full of hidden strength. She smiled at the memory, then paused, feeling a strange sense of timing and fate. And something inside her nudged, a playful superstitious thought that perhaps there was a reason for all of these coincidences. She grinned to herself, thinking, sometimes timing changes everything, just like subscribing to this channel seems to bring unexpected surprises. Then she laughed at her own silly superstition and carried on with her day, unaware of how soon the next twist in their shared story would unfold. Later that evening, she was adjusting Ethan's IV when she blurted, "You never really say much about your life before this. Aren't there family members you want us to contact?" He went very still. His gaze drifted to the window. "It's complicated," he said softly. "I promise I'll explain once I figure some things out." The unspoken weight in his words made her chest tighten. She sensed there was something he was grappling with, something that might push her away if it came out too soon. One night, while Leela was doing her final round, Ethan tried to stand on his own for the first time since regaining consciousness. He wobbled, almost collapsing, and Leela rushed to support him, arms around his waist. Their bodies were close, and she heard his sharp intake of breath. It startled him to realize how weak he still was. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hush seemed loud, full of the unspoken. She helped him back to the bed, her voice steady but her insides trembling. She noticed how warm he felt, how his eyes flickered with gratitude and embarrassment. He muttered, "I'm sorry," but she just shook her head and said, "Don't be, you're recovering." In the ensuing days, Ethan made significant progress with physical therapy. Nurses came and went, and he was allowed short walks along the corridor with assistants. Leela watched from afar sometimes, noticing how determined he looked, how sweat gathered at his temples. The staff admired his perseverance, remarking on how quickly he was improving. Dr. Hamilton even teased that Ethan was making a faster recovery than anyone predicted. All the while, the presence of that mysterious man in a suit hovered in Leela's thoughts. She finally confronted Dr. Hamilton, asking if he knew the man's identity. The doctor's expression turned guarded. "He's an associate, that's all I can say," he murmured. "Ethan's finances were, well, let's just say he's well taken care of." Before she could press further, he busied himself with paperwork. That afternoon, Leela found Ethan in the hospital courtyard, sitting in a wheelchair soaking up the sun. She took a seat on a nearby bench, a comfortable silence between them. The gardens were lush, alive with blooming flowers, and the fresh air was a welcome break from the sterile corridors. She finally asked him directly, "What's really going on? Why does it feel like there's something you're not telling anyone?" He looked at her, conflict etched in his features. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know you deserve an explanation, but I need to handle some personal matters first." He hesitated as though searching for words. "Leela," he began, "I've seen how kind you are, how you've cared for me. I want you to know that I appreciate it more than you can imagine. But there are things in my life, people, who complicate it. My waking up has probably set off a chain of events, and I just don't want you to get hurt by any of it." She noticed how his knuckles turned white as he gripped the armrests of the wheelchair. A wave of concern and confusion swept through her, but she didn't push. Instead, she placed a hand gently on his shoulder and said, "I'm here to help, not to judge." The grateful look in his eyes lingered as she wheeled him back inside. Over the following days, hints of Ethan's wealth began to slip through the cracks. Leela caught glimpses of expensive suits delivered for him to wear during therapy. She once overheard him speaking to someone on the phone, the conversation peppered with terms like board meeting and shares. Her mind whirled. The earlier rumors seemed to have been correct after all. He didn't confirm anything directly, but there was no denying it now. Ethan Wells wasn't just a patient. He was a man of means, maybe even a millionaire. A confusing mix of feelings swirled inside her. She wasn't sure how to reconcile the gentle, earnest man she'd come to know with the idea of an ultra-wealthy figure who could pay for top-tier medical care without blinking. She worried that if he was truly from a privileged world, he might leave the hospital and never look back, forgetting the nurse who'd bathed him when he was at his most vulnerable. The thought tugged painfully at her heart. A tense shift occurred when two strangers showed up at the hospital, impeccably dressed, demanding to see Ethan. One was the man Leela had spotted before, and the other appeared to be a slick business associate, complete with a designer watch and a heavy air of self-importance. They made it past the front desk and marched into Ethan's room without even acknowledging the staff. Leela hurried after them, concern twisting her stomach. She found the strangers in a heated discussion with Ethan. Their voices, though hushed, were sharp, loaded with tension. The words company, merger, and inheritance floated in the air. Ethan noticed Leela lingering at the threshold, eyes filled with concern. The two men turned, glaring at her as though she were an unwanted intruder. She stepped back, her cheeks burning, but Ethan quietly said, "It's okay, Leela, you can stay." The men exchanged a dismissive glance and then continued, "Time is running out," said the one with the designer watch. "The board expects an answer, and your father, well, let's just say your father never would have let it get this far." Leela's heart pounded. Father, board, she suddenly realized that Ethan must be the heir to some vast empire. It clicked into place. That sealed envelope, the secret phone calls, the hush-hush approach. Ethan's voice was steady, though weaker than he might have liked. "I'm not signing anything until I'm certain of the details. I've been unconscious for weeks. I need time." The men pressed him, warning about the consequences. Finally, they relented, but not without a last glare in Leela's direction. When they left, she stepped forward, a million questions blazing in her mind. Ethan exhaled shakily. I didn't want you to see that, he murmured. But I suppose you deserve the truth. My family runs a major conglomerate. I've been handling much of it in my father's stead. Our business can be cutthroat. I tried to keep my hospitalization quiet to avoid a corporate takeover while I was incapacitated. Those two men are from the board. They see me as a means to keep the company stable, but they also see me as a threat if I don't comply. Leela opened her mouth to speak but found no immediate words. She was stunned. The reality was even bigger than she imagined. He was not just wealthy, he was pivotal to a sprawling empire. She recalled her own struggles, the hospital environment, her mother's rising debts. Suddenly, they felt like an entire world away from Ethan's high-stakes realm. Yet there he was, the same man who had looked at her with gentle eyes, who apologized for causing trouble, who listened when she shared her worries. Does it change how you see me?" Ethan asked softly. She shook her head, biting her lower lip. "I mean, it's a lot," she admitted, "but you're still the patient I took care of, you're still a person." He let out a breath of relief. "That means more to me than you know." In the days that followed, Ethan's improvement accelerated. By now, the hospital had discovered that Ethan's entire bill, well into the hundreds of thousands, was handled with ease. The staff was abuzz with gossip. Some of them avoided Leela, suspecting she was close with Ethan for personal gain. She tried to ignore the whispers, focusing on her job, but it stung. She valued her professional integrity, and more importantly, she cared for Ethan in a way she struggled to define. She found it increasingly difficult to deny her feelings. On a sunny afternoon, Leela brought Ethan to the garden for another session of gentle walking. He was more confident now, leaning on a cane rather than a wheelchair. They walked slowly, pausing every so often for him to catch his breath. She guided him to a bench amid the roses. He gazed at her, expression torn between longing and concern. "Leela," he said, "I know you've heard the gossip. I'm sorry, I never wanted to drag you into my life like this. You've done so much for me, and I." She lowered her gaze, fear tinged with hope swirling in her chest. "I don't care about the rumors," she whispered. "I just want you to be okay, that's all that really matters." He reached out, gently taking her hand. The warmth of his touch was electric, and for a moment neither one said a word. But then a nurse called Leela's name over the intercom, snapping the moment. She squeezed his hand once before standing. "I'll be right back," she said, and hurried inside. That evening, a storm raged outside. Rain battered the hospital windows and thunder rumbled. Leela found herself restless after her shift ended. She lingered by Ethan's door, deciding to check on him one more time. Inside, she saw him sitting upright in bed, staring at the dark sky outside. Lightning flashed, illuminating the worry etched into his face. "I should have left by now," she said, stepping in quietly, "but something told me to check on you." He looked at her, vulnerability clear in his eyes. "They want me to sign documents tomorrow," he said. "It feels like I'm being pushed back into a role I'm not sure I'm ready for. But if I don't, the company might fall apart. My father's legacy could be taken over by the same people who left me here alone." Leela approached, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "You'll do what's right," she said softly. "I can't imagine the pressure you're under, but I believe in you." He swallowed, his gaze searching hers. "You barely know me, yet you've stood by me more than anyone else. Why?" She smiled, heart pounding. "Because when you were unconscious, I saw a person worth fighting for, and everything you've shown me since you woke up proves I was right." A sudden flash of lightning lit the room, and in that charged air, he reached for her hand again. In a single trembling moment, he leaned forward. His lips hovered near hers, and she realized what was happening. She felt the rush of emotions, all the times she'd cared for him, worried about him, admired him. His breath warmed her skin, and she leaned in too. Their lips met in a tender, hesitant kiss that deepened into something more certain. When they finally pulled back, the world felt still, as if even the thunder paused. But the next day brought chaos. Ethan's personal lawyer arrived, papers in hand, insisting on an immediate signature. The board members hovered, demanding a resolution. It was a swirl of high-stakes business. Leela tried to stay out of the way, focusing on her usual nurse responsibilities, though her thoughts were flooded with Ethan. At midday, while she was restocking supplies, she saw him slip out of his room, cane in hand, looking pained. He locked eyes with her across the corridor, and for a moment, she read desperation in his glance. Then he disappeared into a conference room with the men in suits. Hours passed and no one emerged. By late afternoon, Leela was pacing the corridor. She thought about stepping in, but protocol wouldn't allow it. Finally, the doors swung open and the men stepped out with forced smiles. Ethan followed. He looked weary, but there was a quiet triumph in his eyes. The men left quickly, not bothering to hide their irritation. Ethan leaned on the cane, walking toward Leela. "I signed," he said quietly. "But with terms, I won't be forced into anything until I'm fully recovered. They weren't happy, but I stood my ground." He exhaled. "I owe it to my father's memory to keep the company alive, but I also need to live my own life. And he paused, gaze intense. I don't want to lose the one person who stood by me through all of it." Emotion welled inside her. She wanted to reassure him, but words tangled on her tongue. Taking a shaky breath, she admitted, "I've grown to care about you more than I ever expected, more than maybe I should." He gave a small, relieved smile. "I want you to see my world beyond this hospital. I realize how it must look, all that wealth and power, but it's also brought me loneliness, distrust. You were the first person who didn't treat me like a transaction." He gently touched her face. I love you, Leela, or at least I'm beginning to feel a love I didn't know was possible." She felt tears prick her eyes. The hospital hallway was far from a romantic setting, but in that moment nothing mattered but him. "I love you too," she whispered, voice cracking, "even though this feels like a dream I never saw coming." Of course, their confession didn't make the challenges vanish. Gossip among the hospital staff reached a fever pitch. Some openly accused Leela of chasing money. Others smiled and said they'd seen it coming all along. And outside, Ethan's business associates kept pressing him to assume a more visible role. Yet through it all, they found pockets of togetherness, shared walks in the courtyard, late-night chats in his room, stolen kisses in quiet hallways. Finally, Dr. Hamilton announced that Ethan was healthy enough to be discharged. When the day arrived, Leela helped him pack his belongings. He had arranged for a private car to pick him up, driven by that same mysterious man she now knew was a trusted security detail rather than an enemy. It was time for him to step back into his life. She dreaded the moment they'd part, worried it might alter everything between them. Standing by the hospital's exit doors, Ethan turned to Leela. "I'm leaving this place, but I'm not leaving you behind," he said, voice low and determined. "Will you come with me, at least for a short while, just to see where I come from, meet the people I can trust, and figure out what this all means?" She looked at him, heart quivering. Images flashed through her mind, her job, her responsibilities, her mother who needed support. But she also thought about how she'd never felt so alive, so recognized as she did with him. "I have to arrange something for my mother," she said slowly. "But yes, I want to be with you. I want to see your world." His face lit up in a grateful, boyish smile. "You have no idea how happy that makes me." That evening, with the sun setting behind them, Ethan Wells left the hospital he had entered in a coma. And at his side was the nurse who had bathed him, cared for him, and unknowingly awakened his heart. Together, they stepped into a future neither could have predicted, hand in hand, hearts full of hope. Though the next steps remained uncertain, business negotiations, family ties, possible backlash from a circle of people who might not welcome someone of Leela's background, she found strength in Ethan's gaze. He might be a millionaire heir to a corporate empire, but underneath it all, he was the same man who had found his way back to life through her gentle touch. And she was ready to stand by him, come what may, trusting that real love could navigate every challenge. They drove off, leaving the hospital lights behind. She glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing the silhouettes of the building fade away. Life was about to change in ways she couldn't fully imagine, but her heart was full, anchored by the profound connection they had forged. As far as she was concerned, this was just the beginning of a story that would keep unfolding, day by day, miracle by miracle, proving that even the most improbable love can blossom when two souls are brave enough to reach for it.